Before John Jones and his multiple arrests, before Chael Sonnen and his one-liners, the UFC had a true bad guy on the roster, Tank Abbott.
If it wasn't for guys like Tank Abbott, I mean, there would have been no early days.
He had that mean mug stare, scary reputation as a street fighter, and came to the octagon with one thing in mind, separating his opponent from consciousness.
If you're anywhere and you wanted to fight me back in those days, it was on.
Tank would drink before fights, was introduced as a pit fighter by Bruce Buffer, and literally made the UFC change the rules to protect people because of how he tried to hurt people.
I could have thrown that guy 5 rows into the thing. Like I told you, I was very strong back then.
But those wild years took their toll on Tank, and in the end, it almost cost him his life. If it wasn't for that deep-rooted toughness, he probably wouldn't be here today. So this is the story of the man the UFC had to tame, Tank Abbott. Before the UFC, before martial arts and the fame, Tank was notorious in Huntington Beach, California for one thing: street fighting.
We would get bios, right, on what these guys have done, where they grew up, and there was notes, any other notes, and always on Tank's bio it said, "My record is 245-5 in street fights."
Tank had a decent amateur background and a little boxing training. Mixed with that inner anger, he was a menace if you ever crossed him. But one of those 245 victories landed him in a little bit too much trouble. While working in a liquor store, Abbott reportedly beat the brakes off an arrogant customer. It just so happens that the customer's father was a criminal detective. So yeah, it's safe to say that this one didn't end well for Tank. He ended up in prison for 6 months, with the judge saying, "Mr. Abbott, you are a maniac. I'm surprised you haven't killed somebody." And that sentence summed up Tank Abbott perfectly. But that time in prison was actually a blessing for Tank, as his strength went through the roof.
This is 600 pounds. Let's see if he can handle it.
Come on.
So, with a bit of martial arts background, a love for fighting and freakish strength, this new fighting company called the UFC caught his attention. People were walking out in gis, wearing wrestling boots. There were sumo wrestlers, but they lacked one thing: a true street fighter with a mean streak. And Tank epitomized that so much that the UFC turned him down at first.
It's when Art called him and said, "Hey, that guy is a maniac. He's not only allowed to fight in the show, he's not allowed to be at the show. No effing way. That guy, he's crazy."
But after a few months, they realized he'd be an incredible addition to the company. He was trash talking on his opponents, dismissing MMA as a thing, and became the true pantomime villain of the early UFC. And his character was summed up in an instance in his very first fight. It was just 18 seconds. 18 seconds of wildly swinging knockout blows, looking more like a bar fight than professional martial arts, but in the end, his opponent was KO'd on the floor, and Tank was mocking his lifeless body. Immediately, the UFC knew what they had on their hands. Perhaps not the most technical fighter on par with a Royce Gracie or Ken Shamrock, but someone that people wanted to watch scrap.
Everybody thought that the skilled martial artist was always going to beat the fighter, right? But there was you were a skilled martial artist, but you were kind of more of a fighter, just a dude who fucks people up. And for you to just be going out there and knocking people out, you became the biggest star of the UFC, even without winning it.
Right.
You know, I mean, you beat a lot of good guys, but your power and your attitude, like when Matua went out and you did a little dance.
And then there were the stories. Countless stories of bar fights making future UFC champions cry in training. It made Tank this cult hero.
I went over in his area, and it didn't take long before he noticed me, and he said something smart. So I ear cuffed him and slapped him upside the head. And then a whole riot took place in this cocktail party. You know, I never understood why you have a cocktail party with a bunch of fighters.
I don't believe that.
That's an absolute truth.
Come on.
There's one thing that I'll take a lie detector test.
But Tito's an accomplished wrestler, right?
Yeah, he's tough, man. He got a big neck and a big head.
Yeah, massive head.
How you put your arm around that big head?
It was a front. He shot on me, and I got in a front head and arm, and I was squeezing and choking him. Maybe after he went away with John Lober and started taking steroids that made his head grow so big, that that he was the pussy that I know him to be.
While we never saw those fights go down, we did see something that changed the course of the UFC forever. In the first of his 3 fights at UFC Ultimate 1996, Tank faced a guy called Cal Worsham, a pretty unknown name, but this fight went down in the history books. In the first 20 seconds, Tank had picked Worsham up and was literally trying to throw him outside of the octagon onto the steel or concrete.
Oh, you almost threw him out of the mat, out of the octagon.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, well, I could have thrown that guy 5 rows into the thing. Like I told you, I was very strong back then. And I sat there, I had a minute to think. His ass was up on the pole there. And I go, if I throw that fucker out, he's going to come back and I'm going to have to take him down again and beat on him again. I could just chain pull him off the fence and finish it. And that's what I opted to do.
The UFC had never even considered this a possibility, so there was no rule against it. At one point, Worsham is practically sitting on top of the octagon side, throwing punches down. He said if it wasn't for the material surrounding the cage, Tank would have dumped him on his head. Instead, Abbott just slammed him down, started raining down punches until Worsham submitted. And as a result, the UFC quickly made a rule stating it was an illegal move to try to throw your opponent over the octagon.
They made a rule out of it, I guess.
Because you can't throw people out of the cage.
Yeah,
because
you
of
can. Right. And a lot of things they did, they go, oops, we didn't think about that. Like the fish hooking.
But it just summed Tank Abbott up. He wasn't here for a gentleman's martial arts fight. He wasn't going to play by the rules. He was going to do whatever impulse came to him in the moment. It made him an actual star in those early days. People couldn't quite understand the jiu-jitsu or relate to the karate fighters, but a hard-nosed, beer-drinking, out-of-shape American who loved to fight fans could get behind that easily enough. And while Tank went on to have a bit of a win-one, lose-one UFC career, he was always going to be in barn burners and even fought for the heavyweight title at one point. But the sport was moving fast, and Tank decided to step away and make a name for himself outside of fighting.
Still tonight, Hulk Hogan and Mike Aldrin will continue their battle out here in the ring. Let's set the table. What's happening?
With his wild persona and street fighting character, Tank was an absolute shoo-in for pro wrestling. And in the late 1990s, he signed a deal with WCW, an organization that had been serious competition for the then WWF. All Tank had to do was dial his character up to 11, and he made a real interesting addition to the roster.
Goldberg ducks the clothesline. Here's a spear. He almost killed Tank Abbott as Kevin Nash dragged Rick Steiner out of the ring. Oh, what a shot, Scott Hudson!
But Tank being Tank, there was quickly drama. In a scripted interview with future WWE Hall of Famer Rick Steiner, Rick punched Tank. It looked to be part of the show. This stuff is very normal in the pro wrestling world after all. But maybe the strike accidentally connected, because for whatever reason, Tank snapped.
What are you doing coming? You think you're UFC, you beat up a couple guys, you're gonna come here, talk trash?
Yeah, you wanna go? Let's go.
You wanna go?
Whoa! Hey, what the hell is going on? Get out of here! Oh my goodness, look at this! And we got our own tanks! A brawl erupting between Rick Steiner and...
Steiner himself had a legitimate amateur wrestling background, but even so, he likely would have been no match for the UFC fighter at the time. The wrestler was pretty cool about the whole situation, but Tank is still fired up decades later.
Well, Rick might have liked to see things his way on that, but if the barrier wasn't there, he'd probably still be laying there looking for help.
So that was real. You happened to be there at the show, and
sure, it was real. But when things start happening, I didn't want to get in trouble, so I didn't cross the line, so to speak.
At the time, Tank was getting quite the push from WCW. There was even rumors that the company seriously considered him winning their world title. But that all came crashing down when Tank pulled a knife on his opponent mid-match. Supposedly, both he and his opponent were in on the stunt, but WCW wasn't. His push was essentially stopped from that day onwards, and his next storyline was trying out for a boy band wrestling team.
Can you really take a listen to it? You're right. Tank Abbott on his green square. Oh boy! Roddick is out. Roddick comes out. Little payback for Monday night. Double teaming Tank Abbott.
It's safe to say, Tank didn't last long in the pro wrestling scene after that. But during this time, he did feature in one of the biggest TV shows in the world, Friends.
That's pretty huge. Don't worry. Coach, he taught me how to use an opponent's strength and weight against him.
Well, then that guy is in serious trouble.
Both him and John McCarthy had a strong appearance when one of the characters decided to try out martial arts. It just goes to show how big a star Tank Abbott was if both mainstream pro wrestling and big-time television wanted him for their brands. With wrestling tried and tested though, MMA was calling Tank's name once again, but this time was different. Tank was approaching 40, and more importantly, the sport was starting to progress and being a tough brawler just wasn't going to cut it anymore. And that couldn't be more clear in his return fight against Frank Mir. Mir was 14 years younger, bringing some of the best jiu-jitsu in the sport and an all-round solid game to go with it. He immediately pulled guard, grabbed a hold of Tank's leg, and locked up a toe hold for a 45-second submission win. It was a rude awakening that MMA had moved past just tough guys with a ton of aggression and a bit overhand. From then on out, Tank kept losing to lesser and lesser opposition, eventually leaving the UFC and fighting in smaller and smaller organizations. And aside from one single fight, he was losing by finish in the opening minute or two almost every time. That leads to what is undeniably the worst moment of Tank's career, when he fought fellow Street Fighter turned MMA star Kimbo Slice.
Kimbo Slice was he had very good hands.
Yeah.
Like if you watch those videos of him out in the back parking areas where they would fight on like parking lots and backyards and like dodging satellite dishes and shit. You ever see those videos?
I've seen some of his stuff. He's terrifying.
He's a good boxer, and he was boxing people that were not good boxers.
Kimbo was a decade younger, but it was his second ever professional fight. Many fans thought he was a bit of a joke to be competing in the sport, but his story was extremely similar to Tank's, and the fight absolutely favored the younger guy. Kimbo basically knocked Tank out in seconds, only for the referee to say it was strikes to the back of the head and for the fight to resume. And 20 seconds later, Kimbo did the exact same and flattened Tank for the second time, although this time it was absolutely legal.
I remember waking up on the canvas going, holy fuck, where am I at? And we were in Florida, so I'm like, this is Disneyland or something? And I open up and I get up and I stagger to my feet and I look over to my corner and they're like, what's going on? Because they never seen me knocked out.
For Tank, it was all quite embarrassing. Knocked out by a so-called amateur, 1-8 in his last 9 fights, and clearly way out of his depth as the sport had developed way past him. But there was one more nail in the coffin when it came to Tank's fall from grace, and it all started with an online viral video showing him in a rematch against his UFC 11 opponent, Scott Ferozzo. The only problem? It was 15 years later, in a random person's backyard, with both men being incredibly out of shape.
Watch that right. Protect yourself, Scott. Protect yourself. Protect yourself. Cover up.
Everybody, let's cameras.
Cover up, baby. Cover up. Cover up. Cover up. Cover up.
Tank just practically laid on top of Ferozzo without doing much damage for over 10 minutes. For a former UFC star, heavyweight title challenger who sold out arenas, it was kind of sad to witness the drop-off from those heights. After this, Abbott essentially disappeared from the MMA world. It wasn't until a serious health scare back in 2018 that we'd hear from one of MMA's first legends again, and thankfully that inner fight he showed throughout his career carried him through a near-death experience.
Finally got caught up with all my wildlife and blew a gasket on my liver, but thanks to Cedars-Sinai, I got a nice transplant and everything's moving right along.
Those years of fighting and drinking unfortunately caught up with Tank.
I spent 107 days in ICU at Cedars-Sinai. So I also had died 5 times and I had 6, maybe more strokes. It was like a clutter. So I was been out of commission a little bit. Looking forward to this interview because I'm getting fired up again to go out and do things that I love to do, my passion, and that is to kick ass.
But nowadays he looks like a totally different person to the one throwing his opponents over the octagon, mocking his unconscious opponents and being the sport's bad guy. He'll forever be known as a true pioneer of this sport, someone who elevated the UFC in a time it desperately needed, and to this day, someone you wouldn't want to mess with. But perhaps most importantly, Tank Abbott looks happy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go hit subscribe as we're currently working on a ton of videos just like this. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.